We'll go ahead and record. Today is the 20th. Happy spring. We turn towards longer light. The light wins now, and the daylight hours are longer than the nighttime hours. Yeehaw. Happy spring. Now we get a blizzard. Yes, now it's going to snow. So, you already know this. And I told you your learning goal for this really is that I could hand you all the tools and you could build an ecosystem for yourself. Like Biosphere. If I gave you unlimited cash, you want to go build Biosphere someplace and account for everything and make it work? Don't forget the bacteria. No? Do you want to be locked up in something like Biosphere? No? You just want nothing to do with it. Not building it, not getting locked up there. Okay, that's fair. So we could continue this list. You know, this might be a corner of Columbiana County, Ohio. This might be a biological community in this area. And it might have populations of all of these things. Coyotes and rabbits and bluebirds and earthworms and ground beetles and tiger beetles and tapeworms and tent caterpillars and pawpaw trees, orchard grass, white clover. I could put in Timothy, white clover, wild violets, and actually there are about 15 species of wild violets, so I was cheating there. E. coli bacteria, and there are multiple sub-varieties of E. coli bacteria. Wild cherry trees. How many more species do you think we could put in here? Hundreds. I mean, let's even talk about soil bacteria. Take a cup of soil, and the number of bacterial species in it is probably in the hundreds. And they're all part of this community. That's big. They all interact. Every single one of those species influences another species in the system. It may not be obvious how they do it, but it is all so tightly woven that they do. So we're going to start off with this idea. Jenga! I should have busted out the Jenga board and made you guys play. Who here has played Jenga? Okay, good. I'll assign you homework individually. I can send you home with my Jenga set. It's really delicate. And you pull out the wrong piece, everything else goes. Ecosystems are just like a game of Jenga. You might be able to pull out a few pieces and you can't really see an effect. Maybe it's a little wobblier, but it's still standing, it's still good. But it's an incredibly delicate balancing act because of the fact that everything is connected. Removing one piece or adding one piece can dramatically affect everything else in the ecosystem. And this is a word it'll be on the vocabulary for this unit for next year, I promise. It's not on yours, but it's an important one. And the wolf stuff that I had for you yesterday really was intended to illustrate this idea. Keystone species. Do you know what a keystone is? Who here has seen a stone arch, like on a bridge? So here's a stone arch, and this stone right here is called the keystone because it's the thing that is shaped just so that it holds the entire arch up. Pennsylvania is called the Keystone State because if you turn the original 13 colonies sideways, Pennsylvania looks like the keystone in the fireplace. Trivia. That keystone, if you pull it out, the whole arch collapses immediately. It is shaped so as to hold the whole thing together. Keystone species do the same thing in their ecosystem. They're so important to the ecosystem that if they are removed, if they are extirpated, there's a whole cascade of effects. It's like dominoes. Then this goes haywire, then this goes haywire, then this goes haywire, then this goes haywire, and the whole ecosystem changes, often in ways you would not predict. What was the example given in the film yesterday? What was the keystone species? Wolves. Turns out we didn't really know wolves were a keystone species until we removed them all and then a whole bunch of other things followed. That's the thing. In a stone arch, you typically know what your keystone species is. You don't necessarily, or you know what your keystone is. You don't necessarily know what your keystone species is in an ecosystem until it's too late. So once we removed wolves, once the wolves were removed, what happened to the elk numbers? They rose. What happened to the number of willow trees down along the banks? They fell. What happened to the beaver numbers? They shrank. What happened to fish diversity? It declined. What happened? You know, there was this whole cascade of effects. Do you think anybody knew that if you killed all the wolves, all that stuff would happen? Heck no. Wasn't even considered. Just wanted rid of the predators. But that's the thing about keystone species, and we're going to look at a case study a little later that talks about a keystone species in our ecosystem in this area. Well, I'll save that for later. Okay, because it's all connected. You don't know which piece, when you're playing Jenga, gets pulled out and the whole thing falls. You don't know which species in an ecosystem is holding this whole web together. I gave you guys this. This is a quote from John Muir. He was a naturalist and author. And it's very true. It's probably not, you know, it's kind of like, what was the thing, the meme I've seen, don't believe everything you see on the internet, Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if Muir said exactly these words, but he did say something similar. He expressed similar sentiments. When we tug on a single thing in nature, we often find it attached to everything else. And we often can't predict the ways in which all these things are connected. It's not always possible to know all the connections that are there. Honeybees! Okay, Moser, who's going to tell her? Those are native, right? No, they're not. Where do they come from? Europe. They're a European native species. They are not native to North America. They were introduced here when Europeans arrived en masse because guess what they brought on their ships? Hives of bees. Can you imagine crossing the Atlantic on a wooden ship for months at a time with a hive of bees? I'm not sure how that worked. But anyway, they're not native. Now, do they benefit some native plants? Yeah. They're pollinators. They do some good stuff. We like them. We worry about them. We're worried about colony collapse disorder right now. But, you know, overall they're probably beneficial. Have they harmed some native species? Yes. We're going to talk about native bee species a little later. Now, these guys down here, these are a little tougher. I don't know if I can zoom in on them. No, not really. One person said, aren't those some kind of clam? No. Are they a mussel? Yes. Once I say mussel...
What's the difference?
Oh gosh. Well, it gets into all kinds of like subtle variation. A lot of it has to do with the thickness of the shell. They're both bivalves, mussels and clams. Clams tend to have a thicker shell. Mussels tend to have a thinner shell. And there are issues with shape and how they suck stuff in and... No, they're not. They're all bivalves. Bi meaning two, valve being the shell part. These are zebra mussels. These are zebra mussels. Zebra mussels. If you have gone to a beach along Lake Erie in the last, oh my gosh, your whole life, you've never known Lake Erie without zebra mussels. I do remember Lake Erie without zebra mussels. Oh God, I'm old. So in the last 20 years, you haven't seen a beach along Lake Erie that isn't covered in zebra mussels. And I got to tell you, they're pointy. They're sharp. They hurt when you walk on their little shells. They also tend to clog up intake valves at places like power plants. They will jump on top of the shells of native bivalves and sort of smother them and glue them shut and prevent them from eating and respiring and all that stuff. They crowd out other native species. They suck up resources. Now, they have actually made Lake Erie clearer because they're filter feeders. So they basically suck Lake Erie water in. They filter out all the little bits of algae that they can eat. And then they shoot out cleaner water. But on whole, there are some problems with them. Do you know where they came from? Once I say zebra mussels, have any of you heard of them? If you buy a fishing, who here, oh, you guys don't have to buy fishing licenses yet because you're not 16. When you some of you are 16, so you'll have to buy your first fishing license this year maybe. When you buy a fishing license in the state of Ohio, I think there's still information in the back about zebra mussels because these came from Europe. They came from the Black Sea regions of Russia in freighter ships. Ships carry ballast water. So you take a ship, you load it up with packages and containers and stuff, and it sits down nice and low in the water and it's nice and stable. When you offload those packages, then the ship rises up in the water and it's not as stable. So they put water inside the ship. They have special holding compartments called ballast tanks, and they put water in the ship to weight it down to make it more stable. Well, the standard thing that people did for years was, you know, whatever port you were in, when you offloaded your cargo, you sucked in your ballast water, boom. You sailed to your next port to pick up your next thing or whatever. You discharged ballast water. What you're doing is anything that's living in that water is then getting discharged into the new port. And zebra mussels came in the ballast water from Russian freighters that had been in the Black Sea region. And they very quickly spread through all the Great Lakes from the east coast of the U.S. And I just saw a thing when I was looking for images of zebra mussels. They have now been found in Spirit Lake, which we'll talk about a little later. It is an isolated lake in the Pacific Northwest. It doesn't connect to any major bodies of water. The fact that there are zebra mussels in there means they probably came in bait buckets. If you capture bait in one place and you get a scoop of lake water to keep your bait in, and then you go to a lake someplace and you dump your bait bucket, whatever's living in your bait bucket, whatever little larval things are in that water that you can't see, end up in the water. So, this is the takeaway for today, and this is where we'll stop. Tomorrow we'll start talking about symbiotic relationships. It is an incredibly delicate balance. And in an ecosystem, you never know the one little tiny thing that may be the thing that makes the whole tower fall. In Biosphere 2, what was it? Do you remember? Bacteria. Seriously? Bacteria? That's ridiculous. Little tiny single-celled organisms in the soil made a multi-million-dollar project fail? Ludicrous. That was the thing that toppled the whole tower. Okay, tomorrow we pick it up.